get out and support me. That's a blessing. As Christians, we're always to have each other's backs through thick and thin. Life gets tough sometimes, and we're there to be. We need to be there for each other, no matter what sanctuary that we choose to go worship in, whether it be Woodson, Hazel Creek, it doesn't matter. We need to be supportive of each other in lifting up the Lord and sharing the word of Jesus. I'm here today just to glorify Christ. No other reason than that. I'm not worthy to be glorified. But what Christ has done for me, what he has done in my life, that I really am blessed each and every time that I'm allowed the opportunity to share with folks. And I encourage you to do the same thing, whether it be in a beautiful sanctuary as this or out on the street. We're to be a walking testimony for Jesus. So as I share with you today, my prayer is that you would just reflect on your life. Reflect on what Christ has done for you in your life. And just take it out into this old cruel world that we live in and share it, folks. So I encourage you to do that. You all be in prayer for me this morning as I stand up here. I've got to pull muscle in my back, so if it looks like I'm moving slow, turning slow, I am. I've been in slow motion for a couple of days. I feel like that's just the devil beating on me to slow me down, and we're not going to have that. So just keep me in your prayers this morning, and we're just going to glorify God. I want to share with you a little bit about my birthday, bad decisions. Anybody else in here besides me ever made any bad decisions? My life has been full of them. I still make bad decisions to this day. Praise God, he forgives me those decisions. He leads me through them when I make the wrong, and he whoops me when I need it.
That's right.
But it's right in here. This is where he whoops me, right in my heart. But we're also going to talk about good decisions that we make in our lives. I know this is going to be a hard statement for you folks to believe. Back in January the 12th, I celebrated my 20th birthday.
Yeah.
And I know that the gray hair and the gray whiskers kind of makes that a little misleading. But on January the 12th of 1999, I gave my heart to the Lord. I was reborn, a child of Christ.
Yeah.
And that's the birthday that I hold special and dear to my heart these days. You know, I've had 47 of them other birthdays, and none of them mean all that much, and you try to forget those, especially after you've had a few. But you know, the day that I gave my heart to Jesus, that's the birthday that I like to celebrate, and I'm going to share with you about that today. On January the 12th of 1999, Kevin Smith was that guy that liked to get out and run around when he should be home with his family. Would talk vulgar just because I thought that made me look cool. I felt like I had to be drinking and partying just to have a good time in life. And I was a fool back then for thinking that. You see, several months leading up to that January, God really started working on me, really started dealing with me. He was hitting me right where it hurt, right in here. and I would know that was beyond a shadow of a doubt that was God speaking to me, that I needed to turn from my sinful ways. But I let foolish pride get in the way. And I would turn my back and walk away. For months, I did that. There again, I was a fool, making bad decisions. When I should have been saying, "Yes, Lord, I will," and turn to Him for guidance. The foolish man in me would turn and walk away. I would turn my back on Christ. You see, I had been in church enough in my life when I was younger to know that when God comes dealing with you, today is the day of salvation. When God's calling, we need to be saying, "Yes, Lord, I will. I'm going to surrender." Yeah. Not be that fool as I was and turn your back on Him. You see, I knew, even when I was a lost man, I knew and I believed that Christ had died on that cross for me and my sins. I knew of Jesus, but I didn't know Jesus. I didn't have that personal relationship with Jesus. And those months leading up to January of 1999, over and over and over, when God would deal with me, I would make that foolish decision and turn my back on Him. But the night of January the 12th, about 8 o'clock in the evening, for lack of better terms, I'd run to the end of my string. You see, I was out running around with a friend instead of being home with my family. I thought that I could do exactly what I wanted to, when I wanted to. I thought I had the world right by the britches. And I didn't have nothing because I didn't have Jesus. Amen. And that night, we were out on the back road over in Logan County, and I was riding with this guy, my friend that was driving the car, running 35, 45 miles an hour. We hydroplaned in that car. It'd been raining, was nasty, dreary, cold. And that old car just did a 180 and slid off the road, off it, into some folks' yard, off into a ditch of rainwater on the side of the road. The ditch was nothing to speak of. The impact that night when that car came to a stop was no more than if you had backed off into your neighbor's mailbox. The impact was that light. My buddy driving looks at me and he said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine," but you could begin to start to smell that car getting hot. And I remember telling him, "We've got to get away from this car. I think it's going to catch fire." And I opened the passenger door and I stepped out into that ditch of rainwater. In that very instance, my life changed. You see, that bump in the dark that night was one of the mainline power poles going through that community. the impact of that car, that stop, had broken that pole. When I stepped out into that ditch of rainwater, that high line fell in the ditch with me, in the water. I don't have to tell you folks that water and electricity doesn't mix. But I'm standing here before you today telling you that by man's law, you're not supposed to live through that much electricity, let alone in the water. But God saw different that night. I was a big old strong boy then. I was 26 years old. And as best I could describe it, it was like somebody having me by the ankles, slamming me against the ground as violently as you can imagine. I can still close my eyes today. 20 years later, I can still close my eyes today and remember the exact feeling of how my jaws clenched together, how my body trembled and was shaking as that electricity surged through me. It knocked me flat down on my stomach. I remember having my elbows up under me, just fighting to keep my face up out of the water. And as that first surge of that electricity began to run through me, I knew that I was fixing to die and go to hell right then. Folks, that's a scary place to be in life. For those months, I had walked that edge between heaven and hell when I was turning my back on God. Now you look, it'd be just like walking on the very fine point of this pulpit, not knowing which way to fall. You see, with all that time of knowing of Jesus, I knew what I needed to do to be saved. But I let that foolish pride get in the way. Countless times, I would sit in the pew in the sanctuary and hold on to the back of the pew in front of me, holding myself in that seat. When the preacher would give an invitation, did anybody want to come to give their heart to the Lord today? You see, I should have been hot-footing it down that aisle all them times, but I made that foolish mistake of holding on. I was a fool. Decisions, foolish decisions that I made. That first surge of the electricity was running through me, and it paused just for a second, just long enough to gasp for air. And it was just, and here it would come again. All that gruesome stuff, you know, and we've all seen it. We've seen gruesome stuff on television when people are being electrocuted and how violently they shake and tremble. And there's a lot of truth in that, folks. I can still remember what my flesh smelled like burning that night. When that second surge of that electricity was over with, it was just another gasp for air. And here it come again. See, I knew that all I'd had to do prior to this was just ask God to forgive me and turn from my wicked ways. But I hadn't done that, and I knew that I was fixing to die and go to hell. I can't stress that enough, folks, how scary a place that is to be. You see, we're not promised tomorrow. We're not promised a minute from now.
That's right. That's right.
If we're not living for Jesus, we're living against him.
That's right.
It's not that gray area in the middle. Society today likes to focus on the gray area. It might be this way and it might be that way. That's not what my Bible says. All I could think of is that third surge of that electricity run through me was how my life was flashing before my eyes. The foolish decisions that I'd made. And I remember screaming as loud as I could, God, please save me. I don't know that it come out as that scream. I don't know that it come out as a whisper. But folks, what I do know is God heard that.
Yes, sir.
And just like that, just as if you'd walk back here and flip the light switch off, it was over that fast. My life was changed in an instant.
Yeah.
I knew that God had spared me. I come out of that old muddy ditch that night, a new man.
Amen.
Jesus brought me out of the mire that night. See, when that electricity kicked off, I couldn't feel anything from my waist down. My body had been just ravaged by that electricity, and I didn't even realize it at the time, the extent of the damage. But I remember trying to use my elbows to drag my body up out of that ditch up onto the asphalt. As I tried to do that, it was like Jesus had me right by the hand, dragging me right up out of there. And when the neighbors in that community and rescue folks began to arrive, I was sitting up on my butt with my arms strode behind me. Telling them I'm going to be okay. I'm just fine. Go check on my friend because I can't get to him. I knew right then that I was just fine. Not knowing the physical damage that had been done to my body. But that didn't matter, because I'd asked God to save me. In my heart, I knew from that very moment that I was going to be just fine. The two of us were taken by ambulance to Logan Memorial Hospital in Russellville, and then I was life flighted to Vanderbilt. I spent 5.5 weeks in the burn unit in Vanderbilt Hospital. And I was put into a drug-induced coma so I wouldn't remember, is what they explained to me, how much pain that my body was actually in. You see, that very night, the damage had been to such an extent on me physically that the electricity had damaged me so much. My left leg was amputated, just above my knee down. My right leg from my knee to my ankle is about this big around inside that carbon fiber brace. It's things like this, folks, that bad decisions get you when Jesus is telling you what to do.
Yes.
See, I spent that time there in that coma, and I'd always thought that when I would hear somebody speak of a coma, you know, this person was in a coma, I would always think to myself, well, they're just in a peaceful sleep. They don't know anything that's going on. And I think maybe the doctors, and I thought that. And it may be that way for some folks. All I can speak for is for me. But for me, it was times of knowing what was going on around me, but not being able to vent it to the folks around me. You see, now if I have problems or something that's bothering me, and I'm assuming you all the same way, I can go talk to my wife. I can go talk to my children. I can go talk to my friends. And they can give us that encouragement, that guidance, and that hope to help us get through those things. But as much as talking to them can do for you, they can do nothing compared to what Jesus can do for you.
That's right.
And talking to Him and having that personal relationship with Him. There was times that I would be so emotional and so scared. You see, my family didn't know if I was laying there. My family didn't know if I was going to live or die for 5.5 weeks. I can't imagine the grief and the pain and the suffering that they were going through. My foolish decisions had brought that on them as well. You see, what we forget a lot of times is when we make decisions, I think a lot of us look at it as it's only affecting me. That's not always the case, folks.
That's right.
It affects the people around us. It affects our relationship with Jesus. I would get so emotional laying there sometimes and so scared and so tired of fighting to survive. And you know, every time that I would get just to the point that I didn't think that I could fight to survive another day. Jesus would send me a comfort. You see, the Bible talks about Jesus sending a comforter to us. Jesus would send me a comfort in the form of a little angel that would appear right over that hospital bed above me, just at arm's reach. My little angel would appear, turn into a form of a white dove and fly away. And that gave me such a peace and such a drive and such a fire inside me. Even though I was in that coma, trapped in that little world, so to say, gave me that fire and that desire to fight on. You see, the world's like that. It gets tough on us sometimes. We get beat down. The world will beat you down. That's the way Satan will have it. But Jesus is always there to be our comfort in that storm, if we'll just look to him. Let his comfort be that drive in your life to fight on. Fight for what's right. Fight for another day. You see, we need to be fighting for the betterment of our family, our community, our state, our country, the world we live in. But we need to be fighting, folks, for the glorification of that precious name of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Amen.
Let what God has done in your life be that fire that drives you. That's what I encourage you today. That's what I challenge you to do. I spent those 5.5 weeks there, and I was on a ventilator. And I remember when they took me off the ventilator, and I had this hole here where the trach had been, and I couldn't speak at the time. And my mother, God love her, would take her fingers, or she would take my fingers because my body was physically so weak. She would take her fingers or mine, and she would cover that hole where that trach had been so I could try to speak. And I remember telling my mother, the first time that I tried to speak to her, I can't wait to get out of here so we can go to church and I can sing Amazing Grace.
Amen.
You know, to this day, Amazing Grace is absolutely one of my personal favorite gospel hymns, because it was only by God's amazing grace that I'm standing here today.
That's right. That's right. Amen.
As I progressed a little bit physically there in the hospital, they shipped me to Vanderbilt, to the rehab hospital, and I lived there for 6 weeks. Had a couple therapists that worked with me twice a day, every day, and they were trying to make me physically stronger, but they were trying to make me independent again. They were trying to teach me how to live and take care of myself from a wheelchair, because the doctor said I'd never walk again. Not on what was left of my real leg. You see, it's just skin graft skin, and it's frail. Doctors even talked to me a few times about amputation on it. Said that I would be able to do more, progress more. My response to them was, this is what God left me. This is what I was left to stand on. I know it's going to be enough. 20 years later, I'm still standing on it. I'm still using that old frail leg to get me around every day. But it helps with my testimony and for God's glorification. I'm not here for me today. I love to see Terry and Miss Ann. I love to visit with them. I love talking to good Christian folks. But I'm just here today just to glorify God.
Amen.
If you remember my name today when we leave, or if you don't, that's okay. That's not what's important. I'm just a tool that for whatever reason God chose to use. I deserved hell. But I was given eternal life in heaven that night. Because I asked, God, please save me. There was a lot of good times, if you can imagine that, there in that rehab hospital. I was the youngest guy in the whole hospital. Most of the nurses and the staff were about my age, and I guess because God had put such a positive attitude in me, it was kind of, my room was kind of like the meeting place. Every couple hours, the nurses would have to come in and change the bandages on my leg, what was left of it. And I ain't got to tell you what gauze and a fresh burn